And right now, we're going to talk to both guys. Mosher's in the house. McMullen's on the Boardwalk Honda hotline. He's brought to you by Harrah's Resort and Bally's Atlantic City Wild Wild West. They're taking bets at the new sports book. Wager today at the book. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. John, you know when a game is like the one yesterday, your favorite topic comes up, the run-pass ratio. It's a 17-0 game in the fourth quarter, and we saw one run. Egregious or not?
I don't think it's quite as egregious as people are making it out to be. Obviously, you have to close out the game. Doug gave kind of a convoluted explanation, called 2 RPOs, which turned into passes. So from his standpoint, he said before the 2-minute drill, he called 3 runs and had 6 passes. So it depends how you define it, number one. But number two, the bigger issue is make a play. Whether it's running the football, throwing the football, or defensively. You're dominating a game for basically, forget about 3 quarters, it was really 50 minutes, and the team fell apart. And there's a lot of blame to go around. And it's easy to say run-pass ratio, but there's a ton of things to look at in that game.
Yeah, there is. And, you look at the defense. They're playing a dominating game. They're shutting out the Carolina Panthers. In fact, at one point, I thought Carolina just flat out looked overmatched in the game. They couldn't move the ball. And what happened in the fourth quarter? Personnel or poor job by Jim Schwartz?
Well, here's one thing that I think nobody has thrown in the hopper, so I'll do it. You also have to look at the other side. I can argue for that first 50 minutes, what the heck is Norv Turner doing? Looking at the Eagles' defense and realizing Rodney McLeod's not in there, Corey Graham, Sidney Jones, you got a guy who was on the street playing 47 snaps at nickelback. What the heck was he doing until the game was in desperation mode, and all of a sudden the Panthers flipped the switch and start taking advantage of some of that stuff. So that is part of it as well. But I keep going to the fact, and this is another instance of where I say make a play. It could be offense, it could be defense. Even at the end of the game when they fell behind, the Eagles were in position to win that game. And I thought from the first drive where Carson Wentz was bad to the last drive where Carson Wentz was terrible, he was spectacular. But in that last drive, he kept making poor decision after poor decision after poor decision.
John, obviously, when a team blows a 17-point lead in the fourth quarter because it can't get a first down and it can't stop an opponent from 3 long scoring drives, there's, as you mentioned, so many culprits. I think the one that stands out to me, to go back to defense here, is that Jim was watching his defense get picked apart by Cam Newton there in the fourth quarter, who didn't go over the top. I mean, he didn't do anything differently other than take what the defense gives. And what the defense gave was a lot of cushion again to corners, which to the receivers, which you didn't see in the Giants game. And then obviously the pass rush just was not hitting home like it was for the first half, 3 quarters. And instead of doing something, he kind of reminds me of that internet meme with the dog in the kitchen where the whole kitchen's on fire and the dog is there saying, this will be fine, we're going to be fine. He didn't really do anything. And that shocked me. I just thought that for a guy of his acumen, of his resume, of his experience, he didn't seize on an opportunity to say, my defense needs a little bit something different right now because it's not working.
Yeah, I mean, I can't argue with the fact that, I mean, you know, Jeff, Jim does not like the blitz if at all possible.
Yep.
And maybe you do get into a little bit of a funk because the pass rush was getting home, and you don't have to do it as much early in the game, and you kind of, I don't want to say forget about it, but you fall into a comfort zone. I also add into the equation some of the times Jim does blitz. The Eagles have been gashed badly, most notably Deshaun Jackson in Tampa, Corey Davis in overtime. in Tennessee. That was a 0 blitz. So the Eagles haven't been really successful doing that.
Right.
So I think you put that into the equation as well. But I think you're right. I think without Sidney Jones, without Corey Graham, and obviously Rodney's going to be out for a very long time, you have to realize you're under-equipped in the secondary right now, and those guys probably needed some help after it became evident that Carolina kind of figured it out.
John, I want to ask you about the defensive line. Jeff actually brought up a good point on his article on Patreon about the defensive line, how they're missing Bo Allen, how they're missing Curry. Is it as simple as they were just straight up gassed in the fourth quarter?
It's possible because obviously Haloti missed his third game, which was a disappointment. But they actually played Trayvon Hester quite a bit. They played Bruce Hector quite a bit. But you're down on the depth chart, and these are not impactful players. There weren't a lot of snaps from a defensive standpoint. Fletcher Cox has been playing a lot all year. I think it was at 45, which is nothing for him. And he led the way. So, hey, these guys are used to playing more than that. So and then you add in the weather. It was the first really fall-like day in Philadelphia, so you're not concerned about heat and humidity. So I can't say they were gassed as the reason they fell apart. I think they fell apart because they played poorly.
John McMullen at JF McMullen. Yeah, I mean, they played poorly the whole game or just
No, they played poorly for 11 minutes.
All right. So the point is, okay, you're up 17-0 in the fourth quarter. An average team at home closes that game out, right? You're up 17-0 in the fourth quarter home. An average team closes that out. So what does that say?
All you have to do, I think you got to go back to 85 for a bigger implosion in the fourth quarter for the Philadelphia Eagles. It doesn't happen a lot. So obviously you're going to put it. Now I think this era, it's more likely to happen. It's easier to happen. And I say, that's why I brought up Carolina's offense at the beginning. I mean, who's to say how this game would have went if they went in a different direction from minute 1 instead of minute 50? I think too often we fail to look at the other side as well. And they got a sense of urgency out of necessity. Jeff's in the studio there. We're both big fans of Aaron Rodgers. I joke all the time, if you're playing the Packers, the worst thing you want to do is go up 14-0 early. Because if you do, they just stop running the football. And here comes the bomb over your head. They're just gonna gas you, throwing it again and again and again. And look, the Carolina Panthers are not capable of doing that. But when you have that sense of urgency, when you're in desperation, when you pick up the tempo, when you need to score, we see it all over this league. All of a sudden, teams who look terrible for 40, 50 minutes look like they're unstoppable. And I kind of don't understand why people don't take that mentality that sort of like Andy Reid does in Kansas City and Sean McVay does with the Rams. Now, obviously, they have spectacular talent along with it, but it's hard to stop teams in this league.
So what's the message Doug is trying to get across to his team when he says there's no longer pressure on us? Is that him? Is that his coach speak way of saying we were successful as the underdogs? Let's try to retake that persona on.
There's got to be an expiration date on that.
Well, there should be. Well, get this.
It's expired.
We're through 7 games. The Eagles are obviously 3-4. They were favored in all 7 of those games. They're favored in London next week. They're favored in every single game, and Doug is still defaulting to underdogs.
Yeah.
I just think that's his sort of I don't know if that's how he feels from his career as the backup quarterback who nobody believed in, and that's just his mentality that everybody thinks the Eagles and he aren't good enough. Maybe it goes back to Mike Lombardi. I don't know where it stems from. But he's got this thing where he defaults to us versus them. And it's kind of ridiculous. I said it during Jason Kelsey's speech. I thought it was ridiculous. Nobody thought the Eagles were a bad team last year. We just thought they couldn't overcome the loss of Carson Wentz.
Yeah, crazy.
We all thought they were really a good team.
Yeah.
So I think even last year the underdog thing was kind of nonsense.
And I think, John, that Doug kind of doubled down on just poor handling of a press conference today when he suggested that if you can't criticize run-pass ratio unless you're down on the sideline with him. When that's ridiculous. It's like saying that you can't tell me it's raining outside if you're not a weatherman. Certainly, it's criticizable. And if he's now taking the approach that everything he does, he's a Super Bowl champion, and therefore you can't criticize him, we can all go show him the grief that five-time champion Bill Belichick took for not starting Malcolm Butler in the Super Bowl. I mean, he was excoriated by the press and fans. So he certainly can't have the attitude now that because he's won a Super Bowl, nobody has the right to question him.
Yeah, that was kind of it called it crazy to ask football questions, which had a little bit of a Rich Kotite tint to it. I mean, part of it's frustration. I'll defend him in this. In the same press conference, he's getting ripped for being conservative at the end of the first half, and then later he's being ripped for not being conservative in the fourth quarter. So I get his frustration, but yeah, I mean, it's part of the gig. Mm-hmm. And he understands if you win this game, if Carson Wentz is able to put it in the end zone, this is all forgotten. Nobody's complaining about these things. And that's just a reality of being
which kind of goes to what he said, which is we're a play here and a play there from being different. And,
Yeah, and every team that lost to the Eagles was one or two plays away from beating them this year, too.
Exactly.
So yeah. You never want to hear that because they are a play or two away from being 5-2. They're also a play or two away from being 1-6.
Real quick.
Mm-hmm. The only game that wasn't a play or two away was the Giants game.
The exchange that he had with McManus today, when McManus asked him about does he trust his personnel, does he trust the run game? Do you think that that's part of the problem, that he doesn't trust the personnel? He had one carry, Corey Clement fumbled in the fourth quarter. Does he not trust those guys? I've heard Blunt's name, they don't have that guy to run that game out that they had in the past.
No, I think he trusts him. I just think he likes to throw the football. I think it has to do with that. It's what I talk about all the time. I don't think he's necessarily wrong in that instance. But, no, I think he trusts the guys. It wasn't Corey Clement's best game. Obviously, Wendell Smallwood was okay running the football, had actually a couple good runs called back. I just think he defaults to his best player, and his best player is Carson Wentz, and he wants the football in his hands. And I think the bigger part is, that's what everybody's talking about, run-pass ratio. I hear it all over Twitter. I think the bigger indication is the quarterback making bad decisions with a chance to win the game. Throwing into double coverage, holding on to the football. Really, there was a window where Alshon Jeffrey was going to come open if it was an anticipatory throw on fourth down, but he held it. I think that's a bigger deal, but obviously no one's going to kill the superstar quarterback, nor should they. I'm not saying they should. But I go back to that Giants game where I talked about the first touchdown to Alshon Jeffrey, where everybody's like, wow, what a great play. No, it wasn't. The result was great. The decision was horrible, throwing across his body to the middle of the field. And that's what I talk about, making good decisions. Sometimes you make a good decision and you get a bad result. But if you do it consistently, you're going to get more good results than bad results.
I mean, nobody saw that more than Doug being Brett Favre's backup for as long as he was. A bad play magically turned into a good one.
Exactly. But then you fast forward to the NFC Championship game when Brett was on Minnesota, and he throws the interception that cost him, and you have that kind of thing. Now, you live with it with a Hall of Fame quarterback, and I'd rather have Brett Favre than all about, maybe 10 quarterbacks in the history of this league. And Carson is not at that level yet, but he's got an opportunity to be one of those types of guys. So you kind of accept those crazy plays every once in a while. But in the small sample size of why are you throwing with Luke Kuechly sniffing this out instead of going to your next progression, seeing Wendell Smallwood in the flat and getting an easy first down, that hurts.
John, I remember talking with you last week about the Eagles' success in the previous seasons and the previous matchups of being able to intercept Cam Newton and how they've had success doing that. They 9 times in the previous 4 games before yesterday. Yesterday, they didn't intercept them at all. They only have 4 on the season. They're ranked 24th in the NFL in takeaways. What is the main reason for their inability to get interceptions, especially in key spots?
Well, it's hard to get turnovers in today's game. That's number one. Number two, they don't have great corners. I think the hope was that maybe Jalen Mills would continue his ascent. I think the opposite has happened, and he's sort of come back to the mean. I think Ronald Darby's been inconsistent. You've lost your center fielder in Rodney McLeod, and I think Avonte Maddox has done a tremendous job for a fourth-round rookie changing positions, but he's a fourth-round rookie changing positions. And really, if you want to look at his things that he's accomplished, it's really stopping big plays because of his speed, whether it's, keeping Adam Thielen out of the end zone or running down Saquon Barkley, and he did it again. You're not talking about a guy who's a ball hawk in center field. I mean, he's still thinking, he's still learning the position. So other than Malcolm Jenkins, I don't know if they have a big playmaker on the back end. And then, as I point out, you don't have Sidney Jones now. And you're bringing Dexter McDougal off the street, and he's got to play almost the entire game defensively. That's difficult to do in Week 7, and it held up for the majority of the game, and it collapsed late.
What an indictment, by the way, of DeAndre Hall that is, to have a guy who's been on the team for, 6 or 7 weeks now, acquired right after the cut-down date, who just cannot get on the field defensively.
Yeah, it makes you think that they picked him up to be a special teamer, and that's fine. I think the Eagles have been better than most organizations in realizing that it's important to have at least 2 or 3 guys whose main job is to play special teams and help from that perspective. Chris Maragos being the most obvious, Brian Bremen.
But John, just to the point, to play McDougal when you just signed him off the street over a guy who may be a special teamer, but he was also, McDougal's a special teamer, to be honest with you. There's no reason that Hall, unless he's just not picking up the defense, shouldn't be given that opportunity.
And of course,
given his knowledge of the team.
No, I'm agreeing.
Nothing from Douglas either.
I think it's pretty evident that they don't have any interest in him as a safety at all.
Yeah.
Because you're right. And you could add Trey Sullivan played, I think, 3 snaps ahead of DeAndre Hall. He got on the field a little bit, just being brought back from the practice squad. So I'm not disagreeing with it. I think it's plainly evident they don't think he can play safety. Or
nickel. Dexter was basically, if he can't play safety or nickel, and it's important to have special teams guys, but if you can't carry out as a reserve, you only get 53 guys, certain 47 on game day, 46, whatever. If you can't carry out a basic responsibility of getting in there and playing a certain position when you're hurt at it, then you're doing more of a disservice than a service. To me.
And here's one where we might be able to criticize Jim Schwartz, because Jim constantly talks about when you do have to replace guys, you don't want moving parts.
Right.
So if you go back to the Giants game and what they had to do when Sidney went down, all of a sudden they have all these moving parts. They moved Maddox from safety to nickel corner, and then they rotated Rasul Douglas in at safety, who never played the position at the pro level before. It was pretty clear he didn't want to do that again. He wanted to keep Maddox in center field. That's why they went on the street that looked for what they consider to be a true nickelback in Dexter McDougal. That doesn't mean he's a good nickelback because if you're unemployed, but that's what they considered him. He had been here before.
Right.
And at least you don't have those moving parts. That was their thought process. But, hey, if you look at how it worked in North Jersey against the Giants, now that's a much worse team, so you have to put that into it as well. But they certainly looked better with Maddox rotating and Douglas coming in than they did in that fourth quarter. But you can also say for three quarters it worked, unfortunately.
Well, and I guess I asked the question, did they really lose the game because Dexter McDougal played slot?
Well, no, I'm not going to blame it on Dexter.
Right,
you can blame it on a ton of guys.
Sure.
But if you look at the 4th and 10 and Jalen Mills slipping and Dexter was in on the missed tackle as well, he was a part of it. Look, I'm not picking on Dexter McDougal. Anytime you have to go on the street and get somebody in week 7, any team in this league, it's not going to be good. And that's where I criticize Norv Turner. Why aren't you taking advantage of that from minute 1?
Right, early in the game. Pick on that kid.
Yeah, instead of minute 50.
Mike Silver tweets, he's told the Eagles offered a second-round pick to the Raiders for Amari Cooper last week. The Raiders held out for a 1. Today, the Cowboys gave them a 1. Would
revenge for Dallas Goedert?
Would you have been okay with the Eagles giving a second-round pickup for Amari Cooper? And what do you think of Amari going to Dallas and what that means for them?
Well, hopefully it works out better than Joey Galloway and Roy Williams, which I tweeted. They don't have a great history with trading for receivers. Look, the guy drops a lot of – there's no way I'm going near a first-round pick with Amari Cooper. I can't imagine anybody else was going to I don't think he's what the Eagles need. I mean, yeah, he can run, but he can sort of run like Nelson Aguilar can run. And the fact to me, he doesn't look like a deep threat. He doesn't track the football well enough. If you look over, I think since 2015, the only guy who's dropped it more than Amari Cooper is two players, Michael Crabtree and Demaryius Thomas. And it's interesting that Thomas is also on the trade market. There's a reason. He drops the football. So, look, would he have been better than what's here? Yes. Is he going to be that much of a difference maker? I don't think so. And I think the Cowboys are going to rue the day they gave a first-round pick.
Devontae Parker, his name has been mentioned. You mentioned Demaryius Thomas. Any interest there? Yeah,
because I don't think it'll cost nearly as much. Could probably get it done. They want a 3. Could probably get it done with a 4. He's also relatively cost-effective on his rookie deal. So I would be, I wouldn't have a problem with that. And he can run. And you look at, I've talked about a lot, Adam Gase is just a disaster running that locker room. And you saw how he handled Jay Ajayi out the door. And that worked out well for the Eagles.
They've got a lot of injury issues at wideout right now, though. Wilson looks like he could be done for the year.
Yeah, Wilson, and that hurt. Yep. They might need him.
Yeah.
But
he sure seems to have some Chip Kelly in him, Adam Gase.
Yeah, well, look, I've said the way he reminds me of Josh McDaniels when Josh McDaniels had his first job in Denver, and just he wasn't ready for it. He was too immature. That's what he reminds me of. He's won a few games this year, so it hasn't looked as bad, but he just cannot handle people, and I'm not sure if he's cut out for that job.
All right, Mosher, McMullen, and Krause Thursday night with more on this. And then, of course, they'll get you ready for Eagles, Jaguars in London right here on 97.3 ESPN Live from the landmark Americana in Glassboro. John, thanks, pal.
Hey, thanks, guys.